Okay, good morning. Everyone have a Morlock? Huh? Huh? I'm learning this. Cool. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed yesterday. Ready to see more stuff today? Awesome. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys about Composer. Just so I have an idea, how many of you use Composer? Okay, we're done. I'll just... Cool. So, how many of you know who this is? Beethoven. There you go. It's not Nikola Tesla. It looks similar, but Beethoven. So, Beethoven was pretty cool, right? Beethoven was a person who took an instrument, a tool, which was music, and he used it to the best of his skills, right? I mean, the guy actually used math to come up with nice melodies, right? That's someone using something that was created for him to use extremely well, right? And that's what we as open source maintainers, that's what we want for our products, right? We want everyone to use their products in the best way possible, doing everything the way we expect things to happen. However, it happens that once you release something into the wild, you get a lot more of these Beethovens, right? Anyone remember this? This is from the 80s, right? Beethoven. And this was a dog who was really well-intentioned. He really wanted to help his owners and do stuff, but he was just a bit clumsy. And he broke some stuff along the way. And that's pretty much what we see with Composer, right? This is what we saw when Composer was released. Everyone liked the idea. Everyone felt they needed to use it. And some people did some really weird stuff with it, right? So this is what we're trying to do, right? Let's try and fix this and try and make sure everyone's using Composer to the best of its possibilities and really helping out everyone. So, everyone remember who I am from yesterday? Okay, we're good. So we'll skip this. But this is essentially what Composer is. And no, that's not Sebastian. It looks like him, but... oh, this here, look at that. There you go, just like you. Anyway, so you have someone who's publishing libraries. You obviously have the libraries, the people consuming libraries. You have the libraries themselves, which are the apples. And then at the end of the day, you have packages, which is the menu, right? This essentially is the ecosystem where Composer lives. Anyone not familiar with Composer? That is amazing. Cool. So essentially, that's what Composer is, right? You tell someone, look, I want to use a library, maybe Monologue, and someone else says, well, I have a library called Monologue, here you go, and then you run Composer, and it breaks. Does that sound familiar? Does that describe some of your experiences? Yeah. Well, yeah, then you fix it, you get the right version, blah, blah, and then you actually do what Composer is supposed to do, right? Composer is going to get all of the dependencies that you need, put them in your vendor folder, package them up, give you an autoloader, and you can start using someone else's code. No more requires, no more downloading zip files, no more SVN externals. Remember all of those? Good times, eh? So that's done, right? Composer solves that problem. So to give you a 5-minute introduction in case someone is not familiar with Composer, 2 things you need to worry about. The Composer JSON file, that's where you tell Composer what you want. The Composer log file, which represents what you currently have. Then you have a little cycle. Discovery happens on packages. That's where you go find new packages to install. Then it downloads that source from wherever it is, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, whatever it is. And then you have a vendor folder with all the code you want, right? That is Composer in a nutshell, 5-minute pitch. That's what it solves. Do we like Composer? Yeah? Does anyone still miss the old days of require and zip files? Other than Derek and yeah, jeez. Wow. Cool. So apparently we do like it because so far we have downloaded more than 2 billion packages on Composer. To be exact, 2,139,872,458. That was actually yesterday, so this is probably even higher now. That's a lot of packages, right? This is really, we've really been using Composer a lot. And as of, what is it now, 2-3 weeks ago, maybe a month already, Composer is stable, right? Composer has gone stable. We have a final version 1.0. We're actually already on 1.1 now. And that's a big achievement, right? Along with this, we also found out that the market for golden floppy disks is booming, right? In case you don't know what happened. So Jordi made this golden floppy disk to commemorate the stable release. You know, it went gold, and put it on eBay. It sold for 1,020 British pounds. So in case you don't know what to do with your life, golden floppy disks. There you go. But if you have the time, you know, reach out to Jordi on Twitter and, you know, tell him, good job. His whole team, Nils, Jordi, everyone who contributed, thank these people for this amazing tool that has literally changed how we do PHP nowadays, right? With that, small changes. You need to keep Composer up to date, obviously, but now that we have a stable, what we have now is we have what we call the update channels. So a small change to how you do Composer. Composer self-update will always get stable versions. That's great for your production environment. That's great for whatever is rolling out your releases. If you're using a continuous integration, you might want to use the preview flag. That's going to get you the preview releases. This is really important, because even as Composer moves forward, we still need people testing the unstable versions so we can fix the problems before they reach the stable version, right? And especially in your developer environment, if you can run the snapshot, that'll give you the nightly snapshot, and that will really help out Jordi and the team to be able to find all these bugs before, right? So this is something you could adjust in what you have now. Cool, so I'm going to start off, and we're going to divide this talk into two parts. Composer for library publishers, and Composer for library consumers. How many of you have packages up on Packagist? Nice. We want to get that number up. Cool. So if you are creating a library, then the first thing you're probably going to get familiar with is Composer init, right? Composer init is going to guide you through creating the Composer JSON file, making sure you have all the aspects in there that you need. If you're a consumer, then the first thing you should be familiar with is the Composer require command, right? The Composer require command is the best way to install things. Because we know how this goes, right? You go to GitHub, you find a library, and then it has installation instructions, right? Then you go up and you say, well, you have to edit your Composer JSON file. Then you add the package name there, right? Then it tells you, well, then you run Composer update or install, or well, you run something and then you get the package, right? How many of you have seen those instructions on GitHub? Nope. Don't do that. Don't do that. Has anyone ever heard of the Dohms Kraken? No? Jeez, I've done a poor marketing. So don't do that. Just don't do that. 2 years ago, I went, what was it, a year? No, 2 years ago. I went through over 50 repositories fixing all of this, because this is not the way you should do it. If you're adding new dependencies, Composer require is your friend. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, it will edit your JSON file by itself, so you don't need to worry. Second of all, it will run the proper command, which is an update, a controlled update only of this package and its dependencies. That means it will only affect what it needs to affect. If you run a Composer update without anything else, you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff, and that can get confusing depending on what you're doing. So Composer require, even better, it has two new modes of operation. So first of all, if you just do this, you don't even have to tell it which version to install. It will by itself figure out the latest version, in this case, the caret 1.1 or 1.21 or whatever it is right now. So it will figure that out. Even better, if you just type Composer require and hit enter, you go through an interactive step where it will actually search for the libraries and give you an option. So if you don't remember what the package name is, just type Composer require. It will give you a little search prompt. You type the name of the thing. It will give you a list of the packages that match that. I mean, how easy can it get, right? Such simple things. So Composer require, no longer editing your JSON file for adding dependencies. Also, if you want to remove, anyone here is OCD about having packages in alphabetical order? That's not sitting on the front row? Jeez, man, these speakers. So that was actually a question I got at the end of this talk once, like, oh, but I want my packages in alphabetical order. We got you. Sort packages. It'll do that for you. Huh? Don't worry. We got this. So if you're OCD, you can use that. What else? Cool. So if you want to remove packages, you can also use the composer remove command, which will clear out everything from your vendor folder that's related to that package. So you don't have to touch the composer JSON file for these things. Require, remove, and you're done. Nice, clean, and effective. Okay, library publishers. Think about Composer and how you use it properly for publishing libraries is that it's bigger than that. It's not just about how you use Composer, it's also about how you build your package, how you treat your users. Right? That's very important for the Composer ecosystem. Because if we're not doing a bunch of things in a standard way or in a way that everyone understands, it's very hard for us to have confidence in other people's code. Right? So this section is going to talk a little bit about open sourcing and creating packages, as well as using Composer. So the first thing is, this is what a Composer package looks like. It's a vendor name and a package name. Now, that vendor name is very important. This is your brand. This is your name. You need to have that. You don't want to be using Apple or Microsoft or PHP Unit unless you're Sebastian. That's your brand. It's not someone else's, right? Since last year, whenever you create a vendor, it's now yours. No one else can publish to it, so we have reduced the number of that. But before that, we had a number of issues where people were posting packages to vendor names that were not theirs. For example, there was a bunch of Zen Framework packages which were never created by the people at Zen Framework. So this is your name. This is your brand. This is how you're going to get your name out there and, share the code you're doing. So pick a vendor name that's unique. Very important to pick that name. Right? You want your name to be shared along with whatever you do. You want the recognition that comes with maintaining open source. It's always good for you. However, sometimes you want to reach further. You want to do more things. You want to reach more people, and we're limited in how much we can reach people. For that, we have what we call the collectives. How many of you have heard of the League of Extraordinary People, or packages, or the League of Extraordinary Phil, which is probably asleep right now? Yeah? Oh, he's not here to make fun of him. So this is a great initiative, right? Why is it a great initiative? First of all, if you're a user and you're looking for a package, if your package is if the package you find is in the league, you know that it has a bunch of quality checks that have been done on it, right? The league has its own standard of what they believe is a good package, whether it has, unit tests, whether it was well written, how they did it, if it has documentation. There's a certain bit of criteria for you to get in there. So it's really good for you as a consumer because you're getting a little bit more of a quality assurance there of, oh, this package is probably good. But as a developer publishing, it's also good because they have a lot more reach than you do, probably. Unless you're Sebastian, then you have a lot more reach in them. But if you want your package to reach more people, if you want to see more people using your code, then joining something like the League is a great way to do that. So collectives are very interesting for this aspect. Okay, what should you have in your package? Well, first of all, you need a README file. Right? README files are very important because that's your first step in communicating to your users. This is where you tell them why you created the package, what the package is good for, how to install it, how to start using it. Right? I mean, we've all been there. We look at code, we find, well, this package is great. And then you have to start going through the source code to figure out, how do I use this? Right? If you just have there in the README, look, you want to start using this? Do this, 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 5-line example. That helps the users so much. Helps them just get started and get out there and start using it. So have a README file and make sure all of these things are covered. Also very important is the changelog file. Right? The changelog file is how you communicate with your users about the updates. Hey, look, I have a new update here. It's going to break these things, so this is what you want to go fix. As opposed to, oh, look, there's an update. Let me run my test and figure out what's broken. Right? It's a lot easier if you have nice instructions of what to go look for, what changed. So have a changelog file that helps people catch up to your library and understand what each release does. And even more important than that, and we don't realize this often, is the license file. Not having a license file doesn't mean everyone can use your code. it means everyone is very confused if they can use your code. Right? So it's very important for you to pick a license. If you don't know what license to pick, GitHub has the choosealicense.com initiative. And the idea there is your license should reflect your values. What do you believe your code should be doing? Right? So go in there, check your values, and see what comes out as a license. For example, I like to use MIT because I just want people to be able to use the library. Some people like the GPLs. You need to pick the one that matches the values you have. Just please don't pick the one that says, don't do evil, because that's not very clear. I mean, I'm pretty sure half of the stuff we do with PHP is evil enough. But if you label your class as, don't do evil, then at least Marco won't be able to use it. So that's something, right? Cool. Semantic versioning. Who is familiar with semantic versioning? Who hates semantic versioning? No one. Good. Cool. So if you don't know semantic versioning, it's basically a strategy of creating these numbers that we see on the releases that actually has meaning to it, right? That's the semantic part of it. There's a meaning to these numbers. And this is very important. Because in the current age of things, these numbers, they have been taken over by marketing. Marketing doesn't want you to release 2.0 because they want to have a big release party for 2.0, right? They use this name as a milestone. They use this number as a milestone. And that's not what this number is for. This number is strictly communication between developers. This is what it's there for. This is what we need to use it for. These numbers are ours because they have meaning. For example, what you have is you have the major, the minor release, and the patch release. Patch release, so the least significant number, are for bug fixes. This is when you don't change stuff in the code. All that you're changing is behavior that was not intended, or something that's not working properly, something that's just not right as what you expected to put out there. So bugs. That's it. Users should not have to react to bug release patches. They should just come in and work. Right? There shouldn't be any breaking changes. Same thing for the minor release, right? So the minor release is where you can add new features as long as you don't affect the previous existing public API. Right? You put out a library out there, it has public methods. These public methods is what your users are going to be using, right? This is your API. If you change those methods, then people have to change their code. And if people have to change their code, it's not a minor release, it's a major release, right? The idea behind those numbers is you're telling your users, look, here's my new package. It works fine with what you have now, just update. Or, hey, this is a major release. Something might be broken. You need a day or two to do this upgrade. And that's very important because, like I said yesterday, testing is all about confidence, right? And semantic versioning is also about that. It's to give you the confidence that you can update to new versions of these packages without running into surprises. And this is very important because you want to make sure you're up to date with security updates, with patches. We need to have this around us. If we're using outdated code, we're opening up ourselves to a lot of problems. Cool. That also means I need everyone here to tag their releases. And tag them often, right? The worst thing if you're using someone else's package is you find a bug, you send them a PR, they accept your PR, and then it takes them 5 months to release a new tag, right? And then you're left trying to figure out, okay, how can I use this code if it's not yet released? I have to use the branch name and all these things. So tag your releases. It's pretty easy, right? Someone asked me, but how do I tag releases? Well, it's simple. Git, tag, done. So simple, right? But this is really, you want people, because this is you communicating to users, right? Developers communicate through version numbers or through releases. This is you telling people, look, I have new code out here. It's going to break your stuff, or it's not going to break your stuff, but there's new code. Come and use it, right? So very important to tag those releases very often. Open source is an interesting world, right? It relies on a bunch of people who are passionate about sharing code. And these people are still people. So we have problems. Sometimes we have to abandon projects. Sometimes we have to go do other things. Priorities change. So it's very important that we be responsible with the packages we have put out there, right? Which is why we have built into packages the abandon feature, right? The abandon feature is where you can say, look, this package, I'm no longer going to maintain it. Please use this other one. Let's say you give up your package and you hand it over to someone else to continue developing it. If they want to change the name, this is how you say, okay, well, there you go. This package is now called whatever else. Go use that one. And this is about responsibility, because if you're using code that is no longer being maintained, you're open to security issues. And if you get problems with security by using someone else's code, it makes you afraid to use someone else's code. And then we're back to the world of not invented here. We want people to go out there and be comfortable not reinventing the wheel every 5 minutes. So for that, we need to make sure everyone's using secure packages, that everyone is actually up to date with all our code. So it's very important for you to be responsible. If you mark your package as abandoned, what you'll see is when you do a search, you're going to see it marked as deprecated and pointed to something else. But also in the command line, you're going to see those two yellow lines back there that are going to tell you, look, something in your repository, something on your vendors folder is no longer being maintained. You should probably replace that, right? So it's very important that we be responsible with these things. Then comes the hardest part of using Composer, which is using the right version of other packages. How many of you are familiar with the asterisks when you're binding to package versions? How many of you use it on a day-to-day basis? It's no good. It's no good. The asterisk it has uses. I'm not saying it's not useful at all, but it's a wild card, right? You're opening yourself up to a lot of surprises. You don't want to just put get me a monologue version, whatever. You're completely ignoring all that communication that comes through semantic versioning. That's usually not good. First of all, Composer is going to have to do a lot more work trying to figure out which versions are compatible with what you're asking. That by itself is going to make Composer slow. How many of you have complained that Composer is slow? Yeah. How many of you were using asterisks back then? None. Okay, good. So it is one of those issues. You can use the tilde. Now, if you don't know what the tilde is, and I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with this, I'm from Brazil. So the tilde is what we put on words to make it impossible for anyone else to say the words, right? Like, for example, São Paulo, not Sao Paulo. And given how good my Serbian is, I'm probably doing the same thing. So you have your own little things to put on the words. So we use the tilde for that. And the tilde just means the next significant release operator, right? It's an operator that you can prepend to numbers, and it will simplify your life. For example, if I do tilde 1.2, basically what I'm telling Composer is I will take any version higher than 1.2.0, but lower than the next major release, so lower than 2.0. This means, look, give me all the releases of this version that do not have breaking changes. And this is the important part. This is where semantic versioning comes in. Look, I can take 1.2, 1.3, 1.5. These are all fine because there are no breaking changes in there. There are only new features that I can start using, and everything else that I'm using, I do not have to touch. Right? So the tilde simplifies that by just, instead of typing that whole thing, which you can in Composer, you can just use the tilde. However, the tilde has one particularity, which sometimes causes problems. Let's say version 1.2.2 had a bug, and you don't want that version to come in ever, so you want 1.2.3 to be the lowest version it ever gets. Now, you're going to go and put a 0.3 at the end there, whoops, and you expect it to work the same way. However, it doesn't, because now it's actually going to bind to lower than 1.3, because that's what the operator was designed to do. But it's not what's intuitive, because we're thinking of semantic versioning. So what's going to happen here is only that number is going to go up. You're actually not going to be getting version 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. So be really careful about that. And because we live life on the edge, the first time I was giving this talk, Jordi decided to add a new operator, literally 5 minutes before the talk. So much fun. So we added a caret, which is ironically also something we put on words to make them indecipherable. But it works a little bit different than the tilde. It's closer to what semantic versioning actually does. So same example, if I use the caret, it now actually does what you expected, right? It respects minor and patch releases and no longer accepts any of the major releases. So it actually fixes what was confusing about the tilde operator, right? This is what you should be using. 90% of the time, just use the caret operator and you should be good. So these two numbers are not going to be able to go up, and now you're actually being able to do it. However, semantic versioning also has one extra feature, one extra area it describes, which is the major version 0, right? Releases prepended by 0 dot something, something that looks like that. In this case, this is not stable, right? It's not publicly available. It's a beta software, as they consider it, which means between 0.3 and 0.4, you may actually make changes that break compatibility because your API is not yet stable. Which means if you're using beta software, you don't want your software to go from 0.3 to 0.4, because it's probably going to break and you're going to have a big red screen on your Jenkins build, and you don't want that. So with major version 0, it will only allow the patch releases to be downloaded. You would have to manually ask for version 0.4, right? That's mostly because of major version 0. So this is actually quite handy. Allows you to safely use software that's not yet stable. Cool. So, little example of that. I was looking at PHP Documenter. How many of you use PHP Documenter? Cool. So PHP Documenter helps you generate documentation based on your code. If you're following the rules from yesterday, PHP Documenter will actually give you a nice place to put all of that up. So I was talking to the maintainer, Mike, a good friend of mine, and they had an issue open on GitHub that someone was using this JSON file and they were having troubles getting PHP Documenter installed. Now, PHP Documenter used version 2.1 of Zen Framework and PHP Unit 3.7. This other guy was trying to use 2.3 and PHP Unit 4. Now, what do you think is going to break here? Wild guesses? No guesses? Is PHP Unit going to break? Yes, no, no, yes. OK. Actually, no, PHP Unit is not going to break. And there's a reason here, not just because Sebastian is good at maintaining it, but we're not going to have a conflict, because it's actually a developer requirement. Now, Composer will only read the developer requirements of the root library, which means your application. It will not read the required dev of everything else you have required. So it will never even look at this. It will only look and install PHP Unit 4, which at this point is very outdated. You should be using newer versions. Right? Cool. But however, we are going to have an issue here, because 2.3 is obviously not compatible with 2.1.star. Right? So this is the kind of thing. Now, this was done because of a difference between the versions of PHP and the minimum requirements, which was actually not the real reason. It was not a valid reason to do that. But by not being permissive, anyone not using that exact version of Zen Framework could not use PHP Documenter, regardless of it being a developer requirement or not. Right? So if you replace that with a caret 2.1, you're still maintaining the same minimum requirements of the library. You're not changing that. But whoever is using newer versions of Zen Framework can still use that library. So try to be as permissive as possible with your dependencies so that you don't get in the way of other people. Cool. Now, for consumers. Now, the biggest question that I've seen with people using Composer is the old question of, should I install or update? Has anyone ever been confused on whether they should run a Composer install or Composer update? Everyone very confident that they know exactly what to do. Cool. So let's do a little game, right? So I'm going to ask you a question, and by raise of hand, you tell me what I should do, install or update. If you have seen this talk, please refrain from voting. Speakers. So, you want to make sure you have installed the last updates from the other developers in your team. Do you run Composer install or Composer update? Composer install. Huh? Got you there. So I'll explain the details of why you would do this afterwards, but I have 4 questions to ask still. So, question number 2, deploying a new release of your application to production. Do you run a Composer install or a Composer update? Okay, the installs have it. Yes, you run a Composer install. You want to make sure you have the same dependencies. Question number 3. You have checked out a new project, open source project or application, and you want to start coding and you want to fill up your vendor folder. Do you run Composer install or a Composer update? Okay, the installs have it. Yes, you run a Composer install. Hey, people are doing good. Nice. And the last question, you want to make sure you want to grab new versions of the dependencies of your project. Do you run install or update? Hey, there you go. That's right. You run an update. How many of you were confused? Everyone know what Composer install and update do now, or are you still confused? You're probably still confused. Right, so let's fix that. Let's understand what it is that Composer update and Composer install actually do. So you have your own application, you have your log file, and the log file is very important in this aspect, and the public repository. Now the log file, if you've ever looked at it, what it has is, it has a list of everything that is currently in your vendor folder and what is in there, like which hash of which commit of which version is actually checked out. So the log file will describe exactly what you have in the vendor folder, down to the commit of the hash. Right? So you have version 2.0 of Monologue, and this is the hash of that version. Why? Because the log file is the thing that will guarantee that when someone else in your team runs Composer, they have the exact same versions that you do. So you cannot say, well, it works on my machine, because everyone has the same code base, not one running 2.0, the other one running 2.5, and things going nuts. So what happens when you run a Composer install is it will look at that log file and do exactly what the log file says. It will go up to GitHub and get exactly that commit hash of what's described in your log file. This is how we guarantee that everyone's on the same page. Right? On the other hand, what the Composer update does is it will look at your JSON file, not the log file. It will go all the way up to GitHub or Packages, ask for all the versions that are available, check your bindings, do the whole dance of figuring out what's compatible with what, and get you the latest compatible versions of all the dependencies. And then it'll update your log file. So if you want to get new versions of the stuff in your folder, run an update, it'll get you new stuff. If you want to just install what's expected to be used for that project, then you run the Composer install. Naming is hard. Renaming is even harder, right? We have tried to think about Composer sync, Composer reinstall. Nothing really describes it. Nothing really, there's no word that actually describes everything that the comments are supposed to do. So we decided to just stick with install and update and make sure everyone understands what's going on. Is that clear now? All good? Awesome. Since the stable release, actually, if you run a Composer install without a log file, it has nothing to look at. It will actually run a full-fledged Composer update. Before, it used to run half of that. Now, it will actually run a full-fledged Composer update. So if you don't have a log file, Composer install and Composer update are the same thing, just because it wasn't confusing enough. So, with that, if you're developing an application, if you're developing a project, if you're working in a company, always commit your log file. Always. Then someone's going to ask me, what happens when I have a library? Right? So if you have a library, always commit your log file as well, and completely ignore what Marco's saying. See, the thing is, by committing the log file of your applications, you're guaranteeing that your whole team is actually working with the same dependencies. On the other hand, if you're developing a library, we don't have the same values, right? You don't have the same desire. That log file makes no difference to whoever is using your dependency, right? The log file is only read for the root library. So everyone else's root log files are completely ignored by Composer. So that's not a reason why it should be there or not. For libraries, however, you have a little play of hand where you can have two things. If you don't have a log file, you will get versions that you probably don't expect, and you might find bugs that you wouldn't catch otherwise. However, for the person who's contributing to your project, his build may break, not because of the changes he made, but because of some other dependency breaking. So there's this ongoing discussion, and this is why I make fun of Marco, because we keep disagreeing on this. As of yesterday, I actually have recording of him saying that he agrees with me. But this is a great topic to discuss over beer. It's an interesting, there are different aspects to this that need to be analyzed. But in general, just commit your log file. 90% of the time you're doing it right. Especially if it's an application, then there's no question. If it's a library, we can have a beer and discuss that. Right, so interesting things to do with Composer. Composer update, interactive. First of all, you can run Composer update. It'll do all of your dependencies, right? If you run Composer update and you name a package, it will restrict itself to that package and its dependencies. It's really good in a team that one person does the update and everyone else does the installs. How many of you have had to merge a log file? Did you have fun? Yeah, I didn't think so. So it's really good if you can concentrate that on one person so you don't have that many conflicts going on around the team. If you are updating, and what we do is we have a week in between sprints where we're doing releases, and then half of the team is responsible for updating all of our dependencies, which works great. But Composer update can also be run interactively. So it'll go package by package asking you, hey, do you want to update this? Do you not want to update that? Which is pretty cool. It makes things very handy. Picking versions is also very important if you're doing local development, if you're consuming libraries. How many of you do this? How many of you are not going to admit to doing this? Haha. Just don't. Let me tell you a story about DevMaster. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and generalize what developers do. But let's say it's Friday night. Friday night, we leave the office and we all go home. No, we don't. We go to the pub, right? Generalizing, I mean, some of us don't. I don't drink beer, so. But still, we go to the pub, right? Then we have fun, we have a couple of beers, maybe a couple more, maybe a couple too many, and then we go home. Great, and when we go home, we go straight to bed. No, we don't. We're developers. We get home, we open our laptops, and that is when we start working, right? Yeah, I'm going to do open source stuff. Woo! Completely drunk. That's actually how Doctrine came about, for real. I was there with Guilherme, I saw this. But hey, we do that and we start drunk coding, which is great. Open source, coding, always good. And then we finish that and we commit our changes, but we don't push them to origin, right? No, we don't. We push them because, you know, YOLO, push. There we go. So now, Monday morning, and then you finally go to bed, right? And then Monday morning, someone comes into the office, runs a Composer update, and boom! Drunk coding in your inbox, in your vendor folder. How great is that? See, that is what you're opening yourself up to if you use DevMaster. You're literally screaming YOLO and accepting whatever comes through. Now, that's probably not good, not the kind of surprise you want to be getting early on Monday or whenever it is you're doing stuff. So it's very important to use tagged releases, right? And this means sometimes we have to push library publishers to tag their releases, which is why I say you need to tag your packages very often. We want people to be able to code against stable stuff. So, yeah, think about that. New feature, Composer update, why not? Why not, right? This was added on Composer's table. It basically tells you what's stopping you from updating one package or another. So if you get stuck, which we tend to do quite often every now and then, this can help you get unstuck. Another interesting comment that was added is the Composer outdated comment, which is really cool. It tells you what libraries you have, what versions are out there, what versions you're using, if they're compatible, right? So if it's a red release, you can easily upgrade because it's supposed to be backwards compatible. If it's yellow, then maybe you should think about what you're doing before updating it and just verify what needs to be changed. But this is really cool. It helps you make sure you keep everything up to date. Cool. Workflows with Composer. So we find a bug when we're using a Composer package. Let's say we're using Symfony. We find a bug, we stop working, right? Because it's a bug. We take the day off, it's fine, clients don't care, right? No, we can't do that. We have to keep working. So first of all, run Composer install with preferred source in development means you get the complete Git clone in your vendor folder, which means you can actually go into one of the dependencies and fix it. And then easily push that up back to GitHub. So what happens when we find a bug? Well, first of all, we patch the bug, because we have the clone in there, and we're good, and we share, right? So we patch the bug, we fork the repository, we send a pull request, and then we wait for years until that pull request is finally merged. But we can't do that. We have to keep going. So how do we keep going before someone merges our PR, right? We have to keep going, so we can't wait. So Composer usually reads from Symfony on GitHub, right? Symfony repository. I have found a bug in Symfony, I have patched it, so I have my own fork, and I have fixed something in there. How do I tell Composer, hey, use my fork for now, because I need to use that code, until someone else merges it? Well, you can use the repositories tag for that, and simply point it to your fork, right? Just by saying, look, Dohms Symfony, it's going to look in there, it's going to find the same Composer JSON file as before, and it's going to say, oh, okay, this is now the source for these versions of Symfony. So it will look first on my repository, then in the original Symfony repository. This allows you to tell it, look, use this branch, we keep working, we deliver what we need to deliver, and then finally, when someone fixes that PR and merges it in, we remove this, and we can then go back in and start using the release code, right? Do not put the fork packages on packages. It's still Symfony. It's not going to go Symfony Dohms version. Just don't do that. It caused lots of trouble in the beginning of the system. Now we have some safeguards, but just, you don't need to put it up on packages. You just need to point your Composer to it. However, semantic versioning, right? If I'm using a branch name, Composer might not figure out which version that is. So you can use branch aliases to do that. You can say, look, pretend my branch is 2.5, and just work with that, right? So Composer will be able to work out the dependencies with the proper versionings, and no problems, right? So, running Composer in production. If you want to deploy your code, very important. How do you do that? Well, you want to run this, right? First of all, you want to run a Composer install, right? Because we talked about this. We want to have the same versions that we had in development. You want to have preferred dist. Preferred dist is basically going to download the zip file from GitHub as opposed to cloning the repository. This means it's going to be using cache. It's going to be a lot faster and simpler. Also means you might want to put your GitHub token in there so you're not rate limited. But this is the best way you can make use of caching. You also want to run with no dev, because you don't want PHP units on your production server. Does anyone want PHP unit on their production server? You want it. So I have an interesting story about that, right? I wrote a Rails application once, for the sake of it. And they have a thing called rake, right, which is a command runner for them. I had set up my configuration on production a bit wrong, so it always used the server, the production server configuration. And then I was going to run a cron job from rake, so rake task whatever. I forgot the name of the task, so you're supposed to run rake minus t, which gives you a list of all the tasks you have. I forgot the minus t, so I ran rake. Anyone familiar with rake? So if you run rake without anything, by default, it runs tests. Anyone familiar with what the first step of testing is? Yeah, there you go. So my production database went out the door. It completely purged my production database, which was great.
Why do you write integration tests?
Right? Why did I do that? Well, anyway, so that's another example of drunk coding, right? Why you shouldn't do it. Anyway, running no dev means you don't have these things in your production server, so you're a bit safer anyway. And finally, optimize autoloader, which is even better now in the stable versions in 1.1. There's a bunch of optimizations in there. So even better. Lots of new stuff in there. So this is what you want to run if you want to deploy it to that. Quick tip, composer licenses. If you don't know what the licenses of your code is, you can check these out. It's going to list you everything that you have, and you can figure out if you have problems. Brackets for a little strange situation. Let's say you have your development server, what you're developing on, and then you have a production server, and for some reason you're running PHP 7 in one and PHP 5.6 in the other. If you generate the log file over here, it will install all the PHP 7 libraries, and if you run that log file through a server with 5.6, it's obviously going to break because the libraries are not compatible, right? So you have to kind of fake out Composer. You can actually do that by defining the platform. So you can say, look, pretend that my PHP 7 stuff is actually PHP 5.6. Now, I added this in because Jordi wanted everyone to be aware that this is possible. I'm not entirely sure that you should be doing this anyway. So, Vagrant, Docker, just don't run different things in production and development. But this is useful if you're doing a lot of open source stuff. Yeah? Sebastian uses this. I'm not sure if I'm... Yeah, that's okay. So that's a good example. We have to build the FARs to release, to distribute to people. So you need FAR releases for specific versions, right? And then this is a great option to do that. You also can run with the ignore platform requirements in order to run without checking all these things. Anyway, something interesting to know if you run into that situation. Try not to run into that situation, though. Cool. Satis and Torin. Anyone familiar with Satis or Torin? Cool. So all that we've talked about now is public packages. Public, public, public. But inside your own work, you also write code that you share between your projects. And sometimes this code cannot be shared with the internet in general, right? So how do you do that? How do you use the power of Composer also for your private packages? That is where Satis and Torin come in, right? So essentially, Composer will talk to packages, which is where it finds all the packages, and will download stuff from the public repositories. When you install Satis or Torin, Composer will actually talk to Satis and Torin. Now, Satis and Torin are able to communicate to your private repositories. You give them the right keys and credentials. So they're able to manage all of your private repositories, so you can actually use private packages that are only for you and not for the use of everyone on the internet. And you can also use the other public packages. Now, Satis does all that with configuration. Torin, however, out of the box, does really interesting stuff because it also proxies both packages and GitHub. How often has GitHub gone down and stopped you from working? Every now and then it happens, right? Packages, not so much, which is rather ironic that packages is going down less than GitHub, but I guess Jordi's doing a good job. But by having this proxy, it doesn't matter, because you now have mirrors of all the repositories and of packages. Torin does that out of the box, which means you're never going to stop working, which is really good. Well, at least to the boss it is, but it gives you one less excuse to do things. Torin is not free. Torin is commercial software. It's written by Jordi, same guy who created Composer. It's not that expensive. It's cheap enough for companies. But what happens is when you buy a license for Torin, you're actually contributing directly to the Composer project. All that money that goes into Torin buys hours so that Jordi can work more on Composer. So if you want a quick way to support open source projects, especially Composer, just buy a torrent license. It's easy enough. Not going to cost the company that much. If you're a developer, you can use it for free. If you're a company, please contribute. This is how we keep things going, right? Cool. How many of you have done this? How many of you have installed jQuery through Composer? Yeah. No. Right? This is the pinnacle of right tool, right job, right? So while you can install jQuery and some things through Composer, you probably don't want to do that. This is my reasoning for it, right? We have a JavaScript developer, and he built his little library. And then he added a package JSON there for NPM, and maybe a Bower file if he's still up to that. They're now trying to kill off Bower as well. And he does that. That's his environment. That's his ecosystem. Then PHP developer comes along, opens a pull request, and adds a Composer JSON file, because we want to install this through Composer. Then the Ruby developer sees, oh, well, if you can install it through Composer, I want a gem, and then he adds the gem file. You see where this is going? All of these things are being added, and the JavaScript developer has no need for these things. So when he updates his library and starts pulling in new things, these two files kind of like, they get forgotten, because he's not used to these things. He's not a PHP developer. He doesn't have to worry about this. And now you that are using Composer to install this are running into problems. So don't do that. There's a tool for installing JavaScript. It's NPM. It's not as good as Composer, sure. But hey, at least you're not being held hostage by someone else opening a PR in someone else's repository, right? So right tool, right job. Let's try to avoid installing not PHP with Composer. Composer is the PHP package manager, not the package manager to rule them all, which will probably come out in a few weeks, I guess. Everyone's making something new. Cool. So before I finish, one last thing. Do we all remember Pair? Pair, right? Good memories of Pair? Yeah? I mean, apart from Derek, who has really used it a lot. I don't know. Pair had problems. Come on. So Pair was then replaced by Composer, which is great. We love it. Does anyone remember Peckle? Or Pickle? Or Pestle? Or blah. Right? No one could ever figure out what it was. P-E-C-L. That's how we installed extensions into PHP, right? And one of the reasons that it's still alive is that we have not. Pair is still alive because we have not replaced Peckle yet. So for that, we have a solution because everybody likes pickles, right? No, no. Works better with the German crowd. Pickles are usually part of. No. We got a broken German in the front row. Can send help. Cool. So what we did is now actually Pierre Joy created a tool called Pickle. So we're no longer discussing whether it's Pickle, Peckle, or whatever it is. That actually does exactly what Peckle used to do before. It installs extensions to PHP. Now this tool is going to be integrated into Composer as well. So whenever you have a requirement for an extension in Composer, it's going to be able to activate Pickle and install that extension for you, which is pretty cool. So if you want to know more about the project, it's still in work. There's still an RFC open. They're still discussing, trying to get more stuff in there. But it should be pretty interesting. All right? So with that, thank you very much.
Questions?
No questions?
No questions.
All good? Everyone knows Composer? Nice. Oh, good. No? Cool. Well, thank you.